Well, even if we talk about Halloween, even in the secular culture, we have, based on an old Celtic notion that we're in that thin time in between, this world and other worlds, being in consciousness. And the Catholic liturgy, we also have all saints, reminding the celestial beings, all souls, beyond this life, what happens to them. So our awareness is pointed in that direction. So I'd like to explore that a little bit tonight. The regions of consciousness and being. So one of the ways that's expressed in Buddhist cosmology and epistemology, which ultimately are the same thing, being in consciousness, everything is Buddha mind. Good to remember. Just as heaven is not a place but a state of consciousness, or however it works together, the whole thing, energy-wise. One way it's considered in Buddhism is called the triple world, Trilokya. Ancient Indian cosmology, it goes back to the Hindus, consisting of 3 realms arranged vertically like a 3-story building, the note says. This is a note from this edition of the record of Tenko Roku, one of the 13th century collections of koans. It has a lot of cosmology and mythology in it, much more than other collections. Anyway, the lower realm is the realm of desire, Kama. You know that word, Kama Sutra, and desire, etc. Probably you've heard that. And you know the 6 levels of being. I've commented on those before. So it contains hells, and the hungry ghosts, animals, humans, Ashuras, and several of the lower celestial realms. So that already surprised me. To say that even some of the highest celestial realms are still considered part of the realm of desire. Okay, we'll look at that more in a second. The second realm, the realm of form, Rupa, is inhabited by celestial beings. So that's only the celestial area, but it's still considered form, as opposed to emptiness, or not opposed, depending on how you evolve in consciousness. The third and the highest realm is that of formlessness, Arupya, and is inhabited by celestial beings without form. What? Okay. But, as if that were not enough, all these are still included within the conditioned world of birth and death, samsara, in other words. And so to leave the triple world, which is a phrase that comes up in one of these koans, to leave the triple world means that one becomes enlightened and therefore liberated from rebirth and suffering. So that's what enlightenment, nirvana means. You're liberated from the wheel of samsara. I'm sure you've heard that many times. And therefore rebirth and suffering, etc. But wow, if even celestial beings are still in the realm of desire and form, wow, this is pretty challenging. So I was happy to find that one of the great sutras, and I've mentioned this a little bit, but I know, for example, my colleague, Sensei Paul Schubert, has been commenting a good deal on this particular sutra over the past year or so. So this is called the Surangama Sutra. As you see, it's a pretty noble volume, a thick volume. This one has a commentary by Master Xuan Hua, who was a Chinese master who came to San Francisco in 1968, kind of around the same time as Shunryu Suzuki in the Zen tradition. And he's one of the great commentators on this Surangama Sutra. What is it? Well, it's along the same lines as the Diamond Sutra, the Heart Sutra, a little bit later. We're not sure exactly. It seems to be the very end of the Tang Dynasty, Chinese document, around the end of the 7th century, beginning of the 8th century. With the Indic sources, as we've just said, going back to the Hindu sources. The best current scholarship thinks, and that this would fit very well in terms of the content, the style, and the doctrine, that it might have come from Nalanda University. I visited there when I toured India in the footsteps of the Buddha a few years ago. It's only ruins now, but it was a vast university of Buddhist thought, and Buddhist debate, and Buddhist training, in the early years, in the at this time period, in that first millennium, in our reckoning, the first millennium, for many centuries. So it very, very well could come from that. Now, the only time it's mentioned, as far as I know, in the other books of koans is koan 78 in the Blue Cliff Record, which I've commented on in passing. Remember when 16 bodhisattvas went down into the water and were enlightened? You might recall that. That's the story that's told here, and it's mentioned. That's the source. And I believe I commented it in terms, in the context of a teisho on how sense impressions, how your immediate sense impressions can be the immediate vehicle for enlightenment. This gives a much longer commentary on each bodhisattva, and 25 of them all in all, and maybe we'll go back to that at some point. I'm certainly going to be reading that myself. But what we're going to talk about tonight is these levels of being that correspond to those three realms. And speaking about the realm of desire, I'm not going to spend time on that except when we get to the celestial part, but it talks about humans and animals. And you do find, in case you were wondering, that there's a lot of instances where humans reincarnate as animals. In case you're wondering, that's actually what they believe. But remember here, we're talking about not so much, even in their understanding, but certainly in ours, it doesn't have to be, previous or later lives, but how we actually, what level of consciousness we're on now, what level of being we're on, and we can, for better or worse, share animal consciousness, or because it's all energy. In fact, the particular koan where that is, this footnote, that phrase, escape the three worlds, is cited, actually tells the story. It's one of the mythological stories, I don't know how literally to take it, of a monk who received alms at one point in history and didn't really use them well. So he became a tree fungus. How appetizing. Literally. Because, in fact, that's what his karma was, that he was consumed, like mushroom, since he didn't use his alms well, he became alms for others. How literal is that? Well, you can share consciousness of a tree fungus if you really want. But certainly, spiritually has a deep meaning that we all do become nourishment for one another. We become Eucharist for one another. In Christian terms, we become nourishment, eat and be eaten, as Christ did. So that's an intriguing point. At the end of the realm of desire, here in the Surangama Sutta, they mention about the great ascetic masters as being still in the realm of desire. Okay. That's speaking about the destiny of ascetic masters, chapter 10. He says, some of them, use medicinal herbs and they can fly. Sounds like some of the yogis, that you've heard stories about. Or they ingest precious metals in alchemical practice, and then they can roam freely, maybe bilocate. They can become masters at astral travel, it says. Travel everywhere freely, etc. And the problem is, especially as the commentator points out, that they have all these skills, but they kind of become attached to it. And this fits in with the ascetic practice also in Christianity, when they say, don't get attached to visions and extraordinary things and powers and all this stuff, because it's a trap. If it's meant to be, you're just the vehicle and you don't become attached to it, you just are the channel of it. But it's easy to get attached to those things and to get distracted by those things. So that's what the sutra points out. That these masters are stuck in the realm of desire because they've kind of, get attached to those, what we would call preternatural gifts, which are, very secondary manifestations of something, along the path. So as John of the Cross would say, don't pick the flowers by the wayside, keep going. So that's what the sutra says as well. Then it talks about the destiny of the gods. Now remember, when we talk about gods here in Hinduism, it's a phrase that really means we're called to share this level of consciousness. Gods doesn't mean strictly God. It means advanced beings of extraordinary consciousness and awareness. We would say angels or bodhisattvas. Share this kind of awareness and consciousness. Hindu gods are symbols of this as well. So, he speaks about the gods, the celestial beings, of the 6 heavens of desire. So that corresponds to that first law. Remember we said some of those celestial beings actually live in the realm of desire. So what do we got to watch out for here? Well, this is, according to the sutra, this is it. Okay. They cannot yet renounce their love and affection for their spouses. Oh dear. We talked about psychology last week, and this is one of the real pitfalls that all the traditions fall into. The whole 6 realms of desire here, it turns out, have to do with sex, and not even sexual misconduct, as they say, but just because you have affection for your spouse. All right, let's get something clear. This is not an obstacle. Now, it is true that in many traditions, Hinduism, Buddhism, and Christianity, I should know, I was a monk myself, celibacy can be a real path, a real calling, for one who is called to advanced conscious realization. But it's not required, and it's dangerous. Because you can fall into all sorts of traps trying to be celibate, as you can from not being celibate. So we have to be very careful with this kind of thing. If you're talking about egoic attachment to your particular spouse for your, peace or gratification, well, yeah, then of course, yes, it's an obstacle because you don't have an advanced, universal consciousness of compassion that embraces all. But having a consciousness of love and compassion that embraces your spouse is certainly not an obstacle. It can become a vehicle for a realization. So they go through it. Some have only a small amount of desire, that's number 2 for their spouses, right? But the commentator does say, he's looking at the potential negative side, he's saying, some people think of nothing but sex from morning till night. So you can ask yourself. I once gave a homily in which I said, I think probably people in the prime of life, if they're not concentrating on something else for the moment, really concentrating, they probably have a sexual thought every 10 seconds or so. Am I exaggerating? Is he exaggerating? It is nonetheless, he does make a point there that you can easily, people watching porn all the time, you can really make your consciousness one that was just sex, 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 and that really, really, really is an obstacle. Very serious obstacle, to advancing consciousness. So to that extent, this kind of approach has a point to make. The third, or the 6 heavens, third is some will succumb to desire when an occasion arises, but otherwise. Number 4, they're always still, except when they are unable to resist the stimulus of contact. So their wife touches them, and that's the end. Some have no desire themselves, but will respond to the actions of their spouses. Okay. And number 6, they have no mundane thoughts, and their minds transcend the acts that they're engaged in. And then they ascend to the lower heavens, in the heaven of pleasure derived from what others create. So that's the emphasis of this particular section. So I say it has to be approached with caution. But you see what he's getting at. Anything that does get in the way of going through to the very depth of yourself or the reality of the world or any person, including your spouse, that can get in the way of realization. So that's the realm of desire. Now remember, there's the realm of form. The gods of the 18 heavens of form. All right, don't fall asleep when I'm doing this, but this is the sutra, so it's worth knowing this is here. The different levels that you can imagine, well, they're somewhat arbitrary, but this is very traditional. You've asked the Buddhist how many levels of the heavens there are, he'll say 28. That's what we have. There's something behind it. So the first dhyana, the first level of meditation, corresponds to jhanas in the Vipassana tradition. So here it looks like They refine their minds, but they don't really meditate in stillness, and so do not develop wisdom. Second level, they delight in the precepts and rules of deportment. These are different levels of purity. These are called the Brahma's heavens, so the highest God's heavens, Brahma's heavens, ministers of Brahma. Or the third level, they have clarity of understanding as well. So there's an advancement in illumination and calm as you move forward here. So they're free from the burdens of suffering and affliction, but they don't really have samadhi, full concentration that results from correct practice. The commentator says your pulse may stop when you reach this level. Remember we talked over the summer about manifestations, bodily manifestations as you advance, like your breath can stop for a while. I never heard anybody say the pulse can stop. Now maybe some yogis can do that, but I doubt that your pulse actually stops. Otherwise you have a stroke or whatever. But what can happen, of course, is that your not only your breathing can stop for a minute or two, but your pulse can slow and blood pressure can go down. But that's, as he says, in a pretty advanced state. I don't think the pulse stops. The second dhyana, the gods of the 18 heavens of form. These next three, we just had three, so these next three. This is interesting. This is the level of light. The minds of these higher gods are lucid and still, and from their deep tranquility, light comes forth. So there's a radiance to being, a radiance to consciousness as you advance, and you can experience that. So on this level, they have this light. The next are those who emit light. As they shine upon one another with inexhaustible brilliance and illumine throughout the 10 directions, turning it all to crystal. Crystal, like the diamond, the Vajrayana, the diamond is a symbol of strong enlightenment and power and indestructibility. Sarangama, by the way, Sarangama means indestructible in Sanskrit. And then the third level, they take full control of their light. They're able to emit and respond to many kinds of pure light. And they use it to speak. They abide in the heaven of speech by means of light. Telepathy, okay? This is interesting, but on a very pure level. This corresponds, by the way, reminds me very much of what St. Thomas Aquinas says about the way the angels speak to one another. How do angels speak? They speak by pulses of light to one another. All down, up and down the ladder, light. It's fantastic stuff. And that's what he says here. And the commentator says, in the heavens, the gods communicate by sending pulses of light to each other. Their ideas are transmitted by means of light. Absolutely. I'm sure that happens. So that's fascinating. But he still says their samadhi is not the genuine samadhi that results from correct practice. The commentator says, so their pulse stops, the breath can stop, he says, here, which as I mentioned already. He says, the true breath and the true pulse of one's essential nature awaken and take over. That's how that works. So there is, as you know, an inner breath. I believe there's an inner digestive system, an inner glandular system, and an inner respiratory system, that corresponds to the lower. So that he evokes that here. So that there is a breath and a pulse. We just heard the pulses of light, of consciousness. Third dhyana, the heaven of form. This is the realm of tranquility, bliss, purity. So they have tranquil bliss. On the second level, it's spread to others and becomes a place of refuge. And on the third one, all permeating bliss. Perfect harmony, and the body and minds are peaceful and secure. So he says basically here in the third dhyana, your thoughts stop. It corresponds in Christian mysticism perhaps to that level where even the first movements that come are from the absolute. They're not just no longer from your ego, from your lesser awareness. So your thoughts do stop here. And the fourth dhyana, that's three heavens, and these are four, I believe. Yeah, these four heavens. They are superior in understanding and purity, wondrous harmony that's everlasting, shine with infinite radiance, the light of their blessings is perfected, so more saying here. Then it says, what they do is they renounce suffering and bliss here, different levels. So you're not attached to your bliss. If suffering comes, for example, if you're still alive, if suffering comes, you take it with equanimity. So you're not attached to whatever's happening in terms of suffering and bliss. That they lose their meaning, especially in terms of attachment to them. So that's what he says. You reject both suffering and bliss. You renounce that, and then he actually says, on this third level, their bodies disintegrate. So that's something to look at a little bit more. It's going to come up again in a moment. However, these do not base their practice on the unmoving and unconditioned mind, so they still harbor intentions to attain something. So, and then finally, you have the pure abodes, the five heavens of the pure abodes. That makes 18. I call that the Pure Land Buddhism, or Pure Land of Amida. There's a correspondence there. Suffering and bliss have ended. They no longer struggle with contrasting experiences. Heaven beyond affliction. No longer harbor even any basis for even the thought of suffering and bliss. The wondrous vision becomes so flawless that no perceived object can defile it. It's interesting. Their envisioning becomes that of a master potter, so they can perhaps create by their vision. Interesting. And when it reaches its ultimate point, they enter a state of boundlessness and become gods of the highest heavenly form. And then finally, the gods on the 4 planes. This makes 28 altogether. 4 planes of formlessness. Remember the third level where it's formless? This is really interesting. They transcend all the realms, become arhats. On the second path, those who have been successful and they realize that their bodies are an obstacle to further progress, so they cause their bodies to vanish and to become like space. So this might be an actual case when it is dying. And there are attested examples of masters who, when they die, their bodies become rainbows. Consider that the seed of what we call the resurrected body of Christianity. I've talked about that a little bit before. If you feel like you're way out of your league here, you should. Next, the ones having caused their bodies to vanish, there are no further obstacles. Only their storehouse consciousness and half of the individuating consciousness remain. So the storehouse consciousness is any awareness of your whole life as an individual. And then the individuating consciousness, when you see it more precisely as yours. So half of that little bit remains. On the third one, that individual level vanishes. And on the fourth one, the storehouse consciousness. Your whole life is completely inactive. So you're really on the level of merging with the whole Buddha nature, Christ consciousness, in its full realization. That's still not the ultimate, remember, because this is formless, but it's still not beyond the 3 worlds. And so what is beyond the 3 worlds? Well, nirvana, satori. When you are one with all. Buddha nature, Christ consciousness. Perfect identification. That's when you escape samsara, finally. So you can go back to this, right? Or better, keep practicing until you get to one of these heavens or beyond. I mentioned asuras, which are weird kind of figures. They only has a couple of lines about them here. They seem to correspond to what he's saying, corresponding to different levels and different elements. They seem to correspond to what I would call nature spirits. That's why they can sometimes be a little mischievous or demonic, like leprechauns, or fairies, or whatever, because they are. So, but that's a whole other teisho. But he just has a few things there about it. So, do you need to look at this? Well, no. I mean, just keep practicing. But it's good to know that this is what is believed, has been believed for centuries by Buddhists, and it does correspond to real experiences they have of being in consciousness, this side of the grave or beyond. Who knows? Because, as I keep trying to say, and as Richard Rohr always says, what we call heaven or hell or the beyond death, it starts now. And the only way it can reach fruition is if it does start now. Otherwise, as the Tibetan Book of the Dead reminds us, when we go into the bardo beyond this world, we'll just fall right back down, into whatever, a tree fungus, if we don't, use our time well. Advance in consciousness. Well, that was a little long, but I hope you found it worth it. Let's sit for some vows. And anyone have any remarks, or by the way? I wouldn't.